Two neighbors were fighting over a financial dispute. They couldn't reach an agreement, so they took their case to the local rabbi. The rabbi heard the first litigant's case, nodded his head, and said, "You're right." The second litigant stated his case. The rabbi heard him out, nodded again. "You're right." The rabbi's attendant, who had been standing by the whole time, was justifiably confused. "But Rabbi, how can they both be right?" He thought about this for a moment and he said, "You're right too." It seems like a joke, largely because it is, but it's steeped in truth. Most of the time, when we are involved in a disagreement, one party isn't completely right and the other completely wrong. More often than not, both sides have a valid claim. But that's not how most of us operate. We tend to search for simplicity, for black and white answers. If we believe something, that must mean that it's right. And by definition, all other opinions are wrong, and that others should be able to see the same logic. Of course, the more we grow, the more we evolve, the more we learn that life is not so black and white. It's not so yes and no. It's not so true and false. In fact, rarely so. Nuance, background, context, it all matters. We are easily misled by first impressions. We become overconfident about what we think we know. And when those beliefs are challenged, rather than risk being uninformed or just plain wrong, we double down. Once there was a ship traveling the seas in a very dark night. The captain noticed a light directly ahead and called to his first mate, "Hail that ship and tell them they need to turn quick." The first mate responded, "I'm getting no response, Captain, and we're now dangerously close." Grabbing the radio, the captain said, "Move aside, you who are on course. You are on our course." And then he heard a response from the other side, "No, sir, you need to turn and be quick about it." "How dare you, sir? I'll have you know I am the captain of the largest luxury liner in the world, and as such, I have the right on the course that I'm set." "That's impressive, Captain. I am the humble keeper of this small lighthouse on the coast. Stay your course, and I will happily help with rescue operations." You see, on this Yom Kippur day, our liturgy, as we just read, offers us every chance to see the errors of our ways and to make the necessary adjustments. We ask ourselves, do we dare stay the course when what lies ahead becomes painfully clear? In truth, we should choose any time of the year to correct the course and to get back on track. But today, the power of numbers are on our side. We affirm for one another that indeed we can grow, we can turn, we can change. Time and again, we are reminded of the vital importance of being wrong and being courageous enough and vulnerable enough to admit it. In his book, Brilliant Blunders, astrophysicist Mario Livio explores the many famous, exceptional scientists who would never have left us their legacy were it not, in fact, for a major error. Charles Darwin famously misinterpreted the way that genetics were passed down, while his writings on evolution seem to completely rely on that discovery. The very first model of our DNA made by Linus Pauling were not only incorrect, but it ignored the fundamental rules of chemistry. But that model allowed our knowledge to continue to grow. And that is the only reason that Jim Watson was able to publish his working DNA model. And perhaps the most well-known example from science is the work of Albert Einstein. He actually thought that his assumption that dark matter existed was wrong. He embraced his own mistake to such a degree that it took us even more years to understand that, in fact, he had been right all along. No one has helped us to understand our universe more. And one could certainly argue that the scientific method relies entirely upon the willingness to be wrong, to embrace new concepts and even new theories, and to be open to new information. But outside of that science lab, this human trait is in short supply. In the world of ever shorter attention spans, and despite some recent gains with social media companies making strides to label misinformation and disinformation, many of us base some of our opinions on a meme rather than do our own research, conversations, debates. The technology which claims to open boundaries and bring us a broader worldview has proven to do the exact opposite. Our first impressions are confirmed, and then they're reconfirmed, and once that is done, we seem reticent to accept any change. I have witnessed long-standing relationships, even close relationships, come to unceremonious ends because of a difference of opinion, whether they were informed or otherwise. Our ancestors, they recognized the danger inherent in this hubris. Our ancient rabbis gave us the gifts of their books of law, known as the Talmud. For centuries, these books have informed and sustained our tradition. The primary characteristic of the Talmud is the rabbi's effort to understand every side of an issue, regardless of how critical or mundane it might be. And so to that end, both the majority and the minority opinions are carefully recorded and included. And what's more is that the opinions have transcended generations, even centuries. They are carefully remembered. They are cited in the name of the person who voiced that first opinion. And then seeking to understand their world, our ancestors attempted to teach us nuance, complexity, informing, open, respectful debate. The rabbis, they understood this critical method and this critical principle. They called it Elu ve'elu, Divrei Elohim Chaim, that both sides of an argument can be the living words of God. When two authorities, in this case the house of Hillel and the house of Shammai, differ, we have to choose one course of action. After all, as the Yiddish proverb says, you can't dance at two weddings. Although with Zoom. But just because we picked the house of Hillel's position for practical application, that doesn't make the house of Shammai wrong per se. Their position is also God's word. They believed that the only way we grow as individuals is through the exposure to ideas and concepts that challenge us. We are supposed to remember that truth doesn't reside in black and white, but it is deep in the gray areas of uncertainty. God can speak to each of us through each of us, even when our points of view seem very far from one another. During these high holy days, when most rabbis get a couple of chances to tell you what they might think, many of my colleagues around the country are talking about immigration, gun control, health care, opioids, women's productive rights, reforming the criminal justice system, and a whole host of other key but touchy issues. But as I mentioned on Rosh Hashanah, I choose not to engage in these conversations and topics because they are complicated, but more importantly, because they require back and forth dialogue between us. And I feel strongly that if I'm up here and I'm preaching to you and you can't engage with me, well, then that's not a fair setup. However, and if I'm being truly honest with you, I think there's yet even a bigger, more important reason why I won't address the issue or the issues from the pulpit in this format. Simply put, and I think I'm making my point, I think we have forgotten how to listen. We have lost our ability to appreciate that someone else has a truth as well. We have forgotten how to step outside of our own talking points, to open ourselves up to the possibility that a difference of opinion need not reflect personhood. We, all of us, are supposed to be thinkers. We're supposed to be open to analytical consideration and reason, discourse. I've now been rabbi of this synagogue for 3 different presidential elections. Just imagine with me how after each presidential election, Many rabbis from across the country struggled with how to stay on point and advocate just Jewish values without seeming partisan or making someone in the pew feel uncomfortable. So when I consider the pulpit here at Kol Ami and the ways in which I choose to bring these hot button topics to you, I use the sessions on Wednesday, like Shmooze with the Rabbi, or programs, or articles, or any opportunity that we can dialogue and talk. And I think back to one past Friday night in particular. On this particular Shabbat, as I made my way through the aisle, entering the sanctuary, welcoming you, as many of you as I could, as I always do every Friday night before services began, one congregant that I admire, I respect, pulled me close and said, "Please, Rabbi, leave the politics out of the sermon tonight. I'm here tonight seeking comfort as I mourn a loss, and I hope to get away from the toxic conversations I hear on the news every night. Can you please just bring us something spiritual tonight?" I shared that I completely understood his concern. He should feel comfortable, not to worry. It was just at that moment, as I was transitioning from one handshake to the next, clearly pre-COVID, I'd only taken a few steps to the next row when the next person said to me, it was a woman, and she said, "Rabbi, I am so upset about the state of our country. Please, Rabbi, put the events, what's going on, into context tonight. I need you to talk about what's happening." Oi! But elu ve'elu, the needs and the hopes of different folks are as diverse as the emotions of the day and the issues that confound us. This here is the complexity of modern Jewish life in America. Last week, I spent 25% of my Rosh Hashanah morning sermon just setting the table for what I thought was going to be misinterpreted as a political sermon. I feared, as you saw me pour into the intro, that somehow someone was going to not just be agitated by my words, but somehow feel alienated from the community. I'm happy to report that no member of the congregation felt that way last week. But in the future, how are we as Americans, as Jewish Americans, going to talk to each other about topics like immigration reform, like racial and gender equality, like women's reproductive rights, or even simply the growing response to trends of anti-Semitism right here in our own backyard? Any and all of these issues will define us as a religious people for generations to come. And yet, at the same time, we need space today away from the debate. Time to connect to something larger. Prophet Isaiah calls us today saying, "Is this the fast I ask of you? To sit here with no food and water, to prostrate yourself? Or rather, is not this the fast I desire, to unlock the chains of bondage and not ignore the brothers and sisters who are suffering, to feed the hungry, to clothe the naked, to work together, to talk to each other, to move towards teshuvah. That is our task. Are we courageous enough to do both? Our inability to talk to one another on important issues facing our country is not only because of one president or the other, or even the presidents who preceded them. It is because of us. We, the people, are the guardians of our values, the foundation of our democracy. My dream is that the ideals of America might continue to thrive not only on a national scale, but between us in everyday conversations. My hope is that in the year and the years ahead, we will find more time to sit together with our honesty and with compassion and talk about the difficult issues facing our society. My hope is the conversation will contain kavod, respect, chesed, kindness, patiently listening, not just waiting for the other person to finish their point of view so that you can pounce, but to uncover the nuance and the complexity of the other person's position without destroying each other or walking away. Today, of all days, we have an opportunity to reset with a new intention, to rise above the so-called dialogue of ratings-obsessed network television and politicized mudslinging, and to make a promise to approach one another, family, friends, especially those we have alienated or discount, with an intention to listen. If you're only going to pick this one, if you're only going to pick one, and I hope you will do more, let this be our teshuvah on these high holy days. We are under no biblical obligation to love thy neighbor's opinion as your own. But we do read in our liturgy, we are not so arrogant as to say before you, O God, we are righteous and we have not sinned. Rather, we have sinned. Our prayer book forces us to do what should come so naturally, to admit when we're wrong. Today, we must obligate ourselves to ongoing dialogue with our neighbors, all of our neighbors. We should commit ourselves to considering issues as they evolve, as they change. We need to regain the ability to be open to and to deal with one another and our diversity with complexity and nuance. Today is the day we remember how to listen. We deserve this much from one another. Ken Yiratzon, may this be God's will as we say, Amen.